Okay, good afternoon and welcome to April's Advanced U program for the Association of Fraternity Sorority Advisors. Due to the generous support of Zeta Tau Alpha, Advanced U is designed to enhance the alignment of the fraternity sorority experience with the changing dynamics of higher education. The goal is to provide programs each month that range from new skill development to application of new concepts through exploring a wide variety of topics in higher education and work with fraternities and sororities. Today's program is Collaborate, Create, Innovate, thinking beyond what you've always done. As professionals, we sometimes get stuck and tend to get in a rut when trying to come up with new ideas. This program will show you how to get unstuck and keep things fresh to continually innovate by using the creative problem-solving process, new tools and behaviors in order to collaborate better and get these business-changing disruptive solutions to challenges you are facing. Learn ways to find clues and insight into what our students and organizations really need so you can find solutions to meet those needs. My name is Becky Gleason, and I serve as the Director of Education and Curriculum Design at Zeta Tau Alpha. I have the privilege of serving as the moderator for today's program. Before we begin, I'd like to go over just a few logistics for today's program. Just note that the registration confirmation email you received included audio options for both computer and speakers and telephone. So if you experience any issues, we encourage you to attempt the second option. On the main area of your screen, you should see today's presentation slides, and in the upper right-hand corner, you should have the GoToWebinar control panel. On this panel, you can submit questions to us at any point during today's program. While some might be addressed throughout, we have time reserved at the end for Q&A. Feel free to use this panel to report any technical issues too, so that our team can address them. More specific issues can be handled by GoToWebinar Support Center. Also note that we'll be tracking the Advanced U hashtag on Twitter throughout, so I encourage you to share what you're learning through the program through this tool. So now we're going to begin today's program. We're so happy to have Gert Garman of Broad Perspective here today. Gert will cover her background during her presentation, so without further ado, I will turn things over to her.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. It's beautiful here in sunny Florida today. It's not too hot yet, so yay. Just want to talk to you guys a little bit today about collaborating, creating, innovating. As Becky alluded to, my background is most recently, I ran the Collaborative Design Center at Valencia College, which is a community college here in Orlando. And they built this beautiful center because they were named one of the top community colleges in the country. And the president, who is a really forward thinker, was like, you know, that's great, you guys, but how are we going to stay ahead of it? We've got to collaborate more. And so they built this beautiful center, and they brought me in to bring in businesses and get some revenue in for the college and then work with them. Because previously, before that, I worked for Disney Destinations. So I got to travel the world and train cast members, which is what the employees are called when you work at Disney, but train cast members in Paris and London and Madrid, and then, of course, I went to California about 1,000 times. So, but it was really cool. And because of Disney, they taught me this skill set, and so now I've got my own business, and it's called Broad Perspective, and I've had it for about 10 months now, and I'm the head broad, and it's just the puppy and I, but it's really cool. I'm getting to work on a lot of really interesting projects and be able to share best practices amongst different industries. So, for example, last week alone, I did a creative session for Longhorn Steakhouse. I did one for a pharmaceutical company, one for a mortgage company, and one for my alma mater, which is the University of Central Florida. So, but it's what's cool is that you start to begin to see that there's some trends that happen, no matter if you're a university or if you're if you're a steakhouse, right? But there's some trends that happen with employees, and if people are not communicating or collaborating, I think sometimes people think if they hit reply all that they're communicating. That's not exactly what that means. So, so today I just want to kind of take you through what a session would look like. Becky knows because I've done this for Zeta at their leadership conference, but I try to make things interactive because I think a lot of times too, people don't talk to each other. So I like to put people in circles, then they have to make eye contact and they have to speak to each other. But I also think that people just, oh, hello, how are you? Good, thanks, and you? Good. Oh, yeah, we communicated. So people aren't really talking to each other, and Becky could have the solution for a challenge that I'm facing right now, but until we have a conversation, how do I know that? So that's why doing planned collaboration like I do, becoming a facilitator and taking people through the process, using the tools, using the behaviors, really important. So hopefully you guys are ready to get started. I'm just going to kind of take you through this deck, and we'll just have a conversation. Becky said that we'll do some questions at the end, but as I'm going through some of this stuff, you guys, if you have a question, send them to her, and then she'll send them to me, and we'll talk about stuff. So, I just want this to be nice and comfy, and, feel free to ask away. Okay? So we're going to get started. I like to start every session that I do, whether it's a speech or whether it's an actual creative session, with some agreement. That way people know how to behave. And they know, that they need to interact well together. And the first one is always going to be positive-minded, right? Because you get those people, and we all know them, right? They're that wah, 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 we can't do that, we can't do that, We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But just being positive-minded and being open to possibilities is really important. So then I get the group to agree to that. The next one is to share the air, and this is what I'm talking about by having those conversations. Really important for people to talk to each other. I like to split people up into small groups when I do things, because you always have some introverts, and then you always have some speech makers, right? And so if the speech makers are just talking the whole time, the introverts are not going to even make the attempt. And the introvert could have the best idea, right? When I used to work with the hotels at Disneyland, I would say, okay, you guys, we've got executives in the room, but I also need you to bring in, like, who's a front desk person, and who's a housekeeping person, and who's a bellhop. Bring them in, right? Because they're talking to the guests all day long, and good ideas can come from absolutely anywhere. So I do a lot of work with credit unions as well, and that's why I always say, talk to your loan officers, talk to your tellers. They're the ones who are talking to the members. So really important to get ideas from anywhere. I was doing a speech in December in Maui, and yes, I know that didn't suck. So, but on the way back, I like to sit in the aisle seat, and so I'm sitting in the aisle seat, and this really nice guy comes and he sits by the window, and so we were kind of hoping that nobody was going to take the middle seat, but of course someone did. So here she comes, this little lady, and she sits in the middle seat, and this is a 5-hour flight because we had a layover in LA. So from Maui to LA, it's 5 hours. And so they start to have this conversation. And she just said to him, well, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm a writer. And she goes, oh my gosh, I'm a literary agent. And so they start to have the most fascinating conversation, because she is writing Stan Lee from Marvel Comics. She's writing his memoirs. And it's like, oh my gosh. And she's like, I'm not really a writer. I need a writer to help me structure this bit. So he whips out his Mac and he opens it up and he's telling her all this stuff that he's working on. He writes for a gaming company, and he writes the game Code of Honor. So by the time we landed, you guys, 5 hours later, they had signed a contract and they were going to do business together. Now, had he not been open to that conversation, he never would have gotten that piece of business. So it's really important for people to talk to each other and really have a conversation and really listen to each other too, because you just never know the opportunities, right? And this is especially important when you're working with millennials, like most of you are, because they are always on their devices, and they're not really, observant of things around them. So, really important for people to actually talk. So that's why I use share the air. The next one is to be present. So this goes hand in hand with sharing the air. So if people are on their phones the whole time, they're thinking in a linear fashion. They're not thinking in a lateral fashion. And that's how people come up with good ideas, is if they're thinking laterally. So I always ask people to put their devices away while they're in a session. And then I always talk about this, but I tell people you can date your ideas, but please don't marry them, because ideas have to have their next iteration, right? They've got to evolve, because sometimes it's about timing, sometimes it's about resources like budget, sometimes you just need different ideas. I have a book coming out this year, hopefully on the 1-year anniversary of my business, but I didn't listen to myself, and I preach this every day, and I married my first idea, and I got about 3 months in, and I was like, man, this is a bad idea. So I had to actually break up with my idea and divorce it, and then I started again. And now I'm on about the 6th iteration of my original idea, and I'm in a really good place. So I always say, you know, date your ideas, but don't marry them, because ideas have to evolve. And then I like to set a safe environment, and this is important too. I think, you guys, when you have your meetings for your chapters or your groups, but it's important because if you set a safe environment where people feel like they can talk and that there's no like hierarchy, then people will be more open to things. So I always just say what happens in the room stays in the room. So really important. Then I want to talk about a few creativity behaviors because, like I said, there's a process. Then there's some tools. I'm going to teach you guys some tools today. Feel free to steal them because I stole them from somewhere else. But that's the beauty of the creativity and innovation world, is we're all very open source. But then there's the behaviors, and there's 9 of them. We're just going to talk about a couple today. So the first one is greenhousing. And greenhousing is all about saying yes and, like accepting an idea that someone is pitching and saying, well, yes, and building on it, right? Because again, you guys, we've all been there. We've been pitching ideas and people go, no, we can't do that. And they give you all the reasons. Usually it's money, time, people, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's like, we've always done it like this, or we tried that before, you know. And sometimes they don't say anything at all. They just roll their eyes, right? Well, that's not greenhousing. That's saying no. So you have to be careful of that. The other thing you have to be careful of is if you're pitching an idea and somebody says yes or yes but, then they're hijacking. They're not adding to your idea. They're just waiting for you to be done pitching it so that they can put their own idea in there. So when you say yes and you build on each other's ideas, then it's everybody's idea in the end. And that's really important because that's how you get buy-in, you know, and that's how you get people on board. The next one is freshness. And so I often ask a group, you know, how do you guys get to work? Do you drive the same route every day? You know, most people say yes, right? Do you order the same stuff on your pizza? Most people say yes. You know, do you use the same search engine on your computer? And, you know, yes. And I'm just as guilty because I use a Surface Pro to work on, and it automatically goes to Bing, and I type in Google. So I get it. I'm kind of married to Google. I love it. And then I ask people, and then, you know, do you guys sleep on the same side of the bed every night, even in a hotel? You know, most people, yes. And then, you know, I'll often ask, okay, then, you know, have you ever gotten somewhere and said to yourself, man, how did I get here today, right? Well, the whole reason is that your brain is bored because you're stuck in a rut. You're doing the same routine. So freshness is super important. And freshness can be anything from, like, you know, going for a walk or listening to some different music or watching a different genre of a movie, you know, that type of thing. Anything that might spark a new idea. So freshness is very important. And then signaling. Signaling is usually a behavior for me because I need to signal to people how I need them to be in a creative session. So if you're coming up with ideas and you're thinking like a child, you're being divergent, okay? If you're making some choices and you're taking some of the ideas that you're going to move forward, then you're being convergent. You're thinking more adult-like. It seems like it's easy to go between these two, but it's not because they mix like oil and water. So signaling is important for me because it will derail a creative session if someone's being divergent when you're supposed to be convergent or convergent when you're supposed to be divergent. So I always talk about signaling. And then playfulness, right? Because you guys know we're told at an early age, what, 3rd or 4th grade, that there's recess and then there's work, right? And those two shouldn't meet, but they really should. Playfulness adds a nice light touch that opens up lots of possibilities. So I make people get up in a session, even in a speech, and I make them play a little bit. Usually we do an improv exercise, and there's a website out there called Improv Encyclopedia. Just so you guys know, there's tons of activities on there, but it's just a way to get people loosened up. And I also, during playfulness, talk about how you are actually, you know, where are you when you get your best ideas? And a lot of people say they're in the shower or they're exercising or they're driving or, you know, having a drink with a friend, whatever it is, but no one ever says that they get their best ideas at work, right? And it's because when you're being a little bit playful, okay, you're doing something, but you're relaxed enough that you can actually come up with new ideas. It's called being in the alpha brain state. So playfulness is really, really important. So those are just some of the behaviors that I cover off on. And then I talk about a gentleman named Edward de Bono. And he, if anybody's familiar with the creative process, he's the one that did the like the hats. He created that. He also coined a phrase called rivers of thinking. Okay, and he said what happens is our brains are like a mountain, and every piece of stimulus that we experience, right? Every license plate we've ever seen, every meal we've ever eaten, you know, those type of things. They're like little raindrops coming down onto the mountain, and all that goes into our subconscious. Well, that's great, but that's a lot of information to process, right? So he said that we begin to create these streams of recognition. So, you know, we kind of start putting some things in themes. And then after a while, those become raging rivers of thinking. Now, if you are in a river of thinking, right, it makes you an expert. You know, you guys are experts in your field, right? But you have to get out of that river sometimes in order to get new ideas and to get unstuck. So that's why there's the creative process. That's why there's the tools. That's why there's the behaviors. They help you river jump. And it's really important to river jump, because if you only ever stay in this river, do things the same way you've always done, but expecting different results, then you'll only ever get incremental innovation. So it's important to think a little bit differently. So now I want to tell you guys a little story about the space pen. So this is an actual pen. I actually have one. Someone bought it for me at the Orlando International Airport. There's a NASA store there, and you can buy them there. So I just want to tell you the story. I think it's really an urban legend, but it fits perfectly with what I want to talk about. So, I'll tell it. Think about back in the 60s, right? We've got the space race going on. We're trying to get to the moon before the Russians, okay? So you can imagine all the brainstorming that's going on at NASA. I mean, it had to be crazy times, right? So, you know, what are they going to wear, and how are they going to breathe, and what are they going to eat, and that kind of thing, right? So finally somebody said, you know what we need? We need a pen that writes in space. And somebody else was like, well, yeah. So they put out a bid, and this company, Fisher Industries, they won the bid, right? And we paid $5 million for this groovy little space pen. Now, I mean, it is cool. It writes upside down, right? So it's awesome, and we're very proud of it. So, you know, we got our guy up there. He put the flag up on the moon, so, you know, we won the race, right? Well, years go by, and for about 5 minutes, we're friends with the Russians, because I don't think we are again, but, you know, whatever. We won't get into that today. But the Russians come to visit, right? And so we're showing them all around NASA, right? So, oh my gosh, here's the moon rover, and here's the uniform that the astronauts wore, and here's how they breathe. And then we walk them down a hallway, and at the end of the hallway, these curtains part, music plays, oh, right? Track lighting comes on, and underneath this glass dome is the space pen. And the Russians are like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. And we're like, we know. So we're very proud of this pen, right? And they're like, yeah, you know, they only ever let us take pencils to the moon. So what happened was, no one ever asked why we needed a pen that writes in space, right? So all they did was just made the assumption. No one ever questioned it. So we paid $5 million, and they paid 5 cents to do the same thing, okay? Because a pencil writes upside down. And I will tell you guys that that space pen sells for like $34.95, which is just crazy. And it's so funny, though, because I think we're still paying the $5 million off, which is why it's so expensive. So that's the space pen story. And it just goes to speak to why you need to ask why, right? Because those of you who are parents, you know, what's the big question that your kids ask all the time? Why, right? And then they ask why, and then they ask why again, and they ask why 47 times, because eventually they're going to get to a very different answer. So explore, you guys. Ask why. It's really, really important. So I want to talk a little bit about really how you get some good insights, right? from your members, you know, from your groups. It's really important because it's important to be based in some research. And we found at Disney that what was happening was we were making a lot of assumptions about our guests. And so nobody was really asking the insights team, the people who do research. So it was really important. So I know they just set your this session for May. And Becky, if you want to chime in here and just talk a little bit about what it's about, I want you guys to listen to what I'm going to talk about, but I think you can apply it back for next month's topic as well. So Becky, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for May's Advanced U program, we'll be discussing research and kind of, you know, how do you find the research that's already at your institution, or how can you do organizational research, and also kind of the beginning of that, but also the end of that. You know, what do you do once you have it, and how do you create a compelling story? So, yeah, that'll be our topic for next month on May 16th.
Awesome, thank you. She just started talking about that before we went live today, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So we can tease up your session for next month. So really important, you guys, to look at that research that's available to you. And then we also call that, you know, so we call that research that's available to you, we call it got clues, right? Because stuff you've already got. But then you need to look at that research, and then you need to say to yourself, okay, so what are some not clues? What don't we have that we need? And you can get that from going right to your members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this clue hunting. So for example, let's say that I'm with a credit card company, right? And I want to find some clues about customers or potential customers. So normal clues would be, you know, you would just talk to anybody who's got a credit card, right? And just ask them some questions, get some insights, right? So those would be normal clues. Deep clues would be, well, what if I went to, I don't know, somebody in my call center at my credit card company, right? Somebody who works there, who answers questions. What are some of the things you hear about? So those would be some deep clues. And then weird clues don't necessarily mean that they're from weird people. I mean, they could be, but not necessarily. Weird clues could be something like you, maybe you go to a prison where someone's been convicted of credit card fraud, and you ask them some questions, right? So those would be some weird clues, but clues that could actually lead to some interesting stuff. And then the second part of the clue hunting would be, so being them. So pretend that you are the credit card holder, right? So how do you spend? Where are you going? What are you doing? And then sometimes you can just do, I do a lot of work for Darden restaurants, so that's Longhorn Steaks and Olive Garden, and we use this clue hunting, and we talk about going with them. So sometimes we go on dine-alongs with Olive Garden customers, and we just observe what they're ordering and how they're enjoying their Alfredo sauce and their breadsticks and that kind of thing, but you're with them. And then the last thing would be to ask other people about them. So for you guys, for your fraternity and sorority members, what if you would go and talk to some of their professors? Or what if you would go and talk to some of the other student organizations on campus? Or if they're student athletes, go and talk to their coaches. So you're asking about them. So it's just some different ways to get some insights or some clues, right, about the research that you need to make informed decisions. So then once you have your clues, you want to really capture them. So just remember that a clue is something that you've seen, heard, read, or experienced. And you want to make sure that it's word for word, you know, because you don't want to take something out of context, right? So so just make sure that you are capturing them well, so that what you're coming up with is leading to some informed hypotheses, right, or some hunches. So you ask yourself after reading those clues, there is something about this, and you make some informed guesses. And then you create a catalytic question. So how might we, whatever it is, right? But you want to make it so that it's springy enough that you can actually start to ideate right away. So these are just some ways to use some research. One other way I do, this is a tool that I use, and it's called a human library. And it's really cool. So I'll tell you a little story. I'll tell you two stories about this. So the first one's for Bahama Breeze. I don't know how many of you have a Bahama Breeze. It's another Darden restaurant, but it's kind of Caribbean food, very good. But they came to me, and we were doing a creative session for them, and they were saying, we want to come up with some special events that we can do in our restaurant that help, during the downtime. So I said, okay, cool. Tell me, what's the essence? What is it that you want people to feel when they come into one of these signature events? They said they want them to feel taken care of and pampered and escape. So I said, okay, where else in the world do they create that same essence? And of course, the first thing that sprung to mind was a spa, right? So I brought somebody in from the Ritz Spa, and then it also made me think of hospice care, because that's what the hospice workers do for the patient and the family, right? So we brought in these naive experts. They had no idea what we were working on, but they had the knowledge that we needed to borrow, okay? So we brought them in for an hour, just asked them some questions. So how do you create this same essence? And it was just really interesting, the stuff we found out. So the hospital, the Ritz Spa lady was talking about aromatherapy and the fluffy towels and the robes and the warm table and that kind of stuff. So that was cool, but it's not like we're going to recreate that at the restaurant. But the hospice lady said that when she sends her team out to interview families, that if they come back and they cannot tell her what color everyone's eyes in the family were, then they did not do their job because they didn't make eye contact. So that led Bahama Breeze to change the way they greeted their customers as they came into these signature events. And they were making eye contact and greeting them from the moment they stepped through the door. Because we've all been there, right? You guys walk into a restaurant, the hostess is standing there, how many in your party? She doesn't even look up, So instead, they created that yummy warmth by making eye contact from the moment that people walked in. And that came from a hospice worker. So this human library is really interesting. I'll tell you another one we did. I did some work for Busch Gardens, and it was around their Hallow Scream, so their Halloween party. And so I did this human library, and I brought in somebody from the local jail. I brought in a psych ward nurse, and I brought in a cemetery caretaker. Oh my gosh, it was so interesting. But again, it was the same essence, right? Kind of scary, kind of freaky, and so we asked them some questions, and that led to some really cool ideas that Busch Gardens actually just used this last Halloween. So the human library is really interesting. So for you guys, using this tool would be, if you were trying to create like a new event for your philanthropy, or you're trying to create a new event on campus, who might you actually bring in that does that same kind of essence that you could borrow from, right? And I use the term borrow, but really we're stealing from their brains, so, and applying it back, which is completely fine. So that's a little bit of the human library, and just kind of utilizing your research and applying some stuff back. Okay, so I want to talk about some other ways to attack a challenge. So I just talked about the human library, so that's really borrowing it, right? And then another one is to list rules around a challenge, right? So ask yourself a provocative, what if those rules didn't exist, right? And break the rules. So a story I'll tell you about that is, I'm sure most of you have Netflix. I have Netflix. I actually binge watch on the weekends. But the guy who created Netflix, his name is Reed Hastings. And the story goes that years ago, right, he rented Apollo 13 at his local Blockbuster and brought the DVD home for his kids, and the kids promptly watched the movie and then lost the DVD in the couch cushion. So they didn't find it for a couple weeks. So when he took it back, he owed, like, I don't know, something crazy, like $140 in late fees. And he was like, this is ridiculous, right? So he listed all the rules around a Blockbuster. So a brick and mortar building, right? Limited amount of movies that are available, limited amount of time that you can keep the movies, right? You needed a membership, you needed all this stuff. And he said, what if those rules did not exist? And he created Netflix. And now how many Blockbusters are left? Not too many. So this is a really cool tool. It's called Twist It. Is the name of the tool, because what you're doing is you're taking stuff and then you're twisting the rules and you're breaking them. Another thing to do would be to ask kids how they would solve your challenge, because kids think so differently. They're untainted, like we are. But again, it speaks to that divergent thinking, right? They're unfiltered, they're playful, they're imaginative, they're honest. And, you know, when you get to be adults, we've got to make some choices, right? So we kind of analyze and we scrutinize and we plan and we do all that stuff. But when you're coming up with ideas, ask a kid how they'd solve a challenge. It's really interesting. They'll get you to some very different thinking. There were some AT&T ads, I think, I haven't seen them this year, but last year, where the guy sits around the table with the kid and he said, all right, so, you know, how would you make your grandma faster? And one little girl says, well, we'd strap a cheetah on her back. Now, what adult would ever say that, right? So really important to ask kids. Another thing to do is to reword your challenge, or even reword your meetings, or reword your titles. You know, I mean, it adds some energy. So I'll tell you a couple stories about this. So when I was at Disney, we went to Virginia and we were visiting this company there. Well, the guy we were meeting with wasn't quite ready. So the receptionist greeted us, and I worked for this Brit. So she had tea and cream for him, tea and milk, and she had a vitamin water for me. So she had done her homework on us. And so we had the loveliest conversation with her. And then we got upstairs for our meeting, and we were like, your receptionist is awesome. And he goes, oh, she's not our receptionist. She's our director of first impressions. So he gave her this cool title and empowered her with it because, you know, it totally changed the way she viewed her job, you know, and it gave her, you know, it gave her like energy around everything. So think about rewording stuff. We were working on a project at Disney. It was important work, right? But they called it the Hispanic Target Initiative because we were going after the Hispanic market in South America, right? And it was like, whoa, that did not sound very exciting, you know? And so even though it was important work, nobody wanted to work on it because it just sounded boring, right? So I'm like, you guys, we got to reword this. And so in 5 minutes, we came up with the name of Project Vominos, right? So let's go. And you had to say it like that too. So which is really funny because you know, for a very non-Latina girl like myself to say it like that, people laugh. But you know, we were like, oh, we're working on Project Vominos, and people were like, wow, what's that? That sounds sexy. So then everybody wanted to be a part of it. So it was really important. So think about that as you come up with your meetings or your retreats, or you know, give it a fun name, or have the chapter give it a fun name. It just changes things a bit, right? And then one of my favorite tools is to just ask yourself, what would we never do because we'd either go to jail or get fired for it, right? And sometimes people get a little naughty, and that's okay. So giggle, right? But then ask yourself, why did I giggle at that? Why is that so intriguing, right? Why do I find that so provocative? And then you take that and you change it, right? And you have to make it work for you. So I'll give you an example of how this tool works. So we had the president of the Gospel Music Awards come to Walt Disney World because originally he was thinking about doing his music awards show called the Dove Awards at Walt Disney World. Now this never came to fruition, so that's why I can tell the story. But so I'm doing a creative session for them. So we're using this tool, and I said, okay, what would we never do at this music awards show? And so this guy who's the president of this group, he said, well, we would never have girls in white dresses on swings swinging from the ceiling. Okay, I can guarantee we would not do that. But I'm like, all right, but why'd you find that so intriguing? Now you have to twist it and kind of make it work for you, right? So what they came up with, because at Walt Disney World we have Cirque du Soleil performers, they said, what if we used the Cirque du Soleil performers, had them dressed in white, and have them repel from the ceiling to look like doves to open the Dove Awards? So see how they took that and completely revamped it and made it work for them. So that's an interesting tool to use too, to help yourself get unstuck. I have one more that I didn't put in this deck, but it's a really easy one to do because you can do it by yourself. Pick a random, say you have a challenge and you know what you're working on, right? Pick a random object, something out of your purse or out of your desk drawer or whatever, or go, you know, borrow something from somebody else's desk drawer, and write everything down about it. Like, what are all the attributes? What's it make you think of? So is it orange? Is it round? Is it whatever it is, right? And then you put the random object away, and you're left with this big list. And then you say to yourself, now how might I take one of these words or 2 of these words, and have them become an idea. So I'll tell you how this one works. It's called forced connections. So one time I was doing a session, and I was at Disney doing this session, and I had forgotten to bring my random object. So I had this crazy silver necklace on, and so I was like, oh, I'll just use my necklace. I wear big chunky jewelry, and so I was like, okay, so describe my necklace. Well, the first person goes tacky. I was like, oh, that hurt, right? Shiny, silver, blah blah blah. So anyways, I didn't put the necklace back on because I felt bad then about my choice of jewelry that day, accessories. So, but we took the list, and what we were working on, I was working with some HR professionals. We were working on coming up with like a employee recognition program that would last a little bit longer than just a day, right? And so, so they used those 2 words. They used the tacky word, and they used the shiny word, and they came up with a spotlight on a group that lasted about a month. So it stuck, right? So they took the tacky word and made it and so anyways, it was really interesting how they took it and made it work, right? So just think about that too. You know, that's just an easy thing that you can do in 5 minutes at your desk. So, and you know, you can do it with your chapter members too. I mean, these tools are fun to use. You know, like I said, I use a lot of improv. Also, there is a kid out there named Kid President. I don't know if you guys are familiar with his videos or not, but if you show one of his videos, really, really important because he just has effective communication skills and makes you laugh, and he's just adorable, right? So, but that kind of loosens people up, and anytime you can get people to think a little bit differently, it's all good. And then again, you guys, just find a creative space or some time on your calendar every day, even if it's 10 or 15 minutes, to distract your brain and give yourself some time to think. Because, you know, we're all looking at those Outlook calendars that look like barcodes, and we've all got them, right? So if you just like measure out some time every day where you just go, whew, all right, and so you think, it's really important. So one last thing that I want to talk about is it's another creativity behavior, and then we'll take questions from you guys. I talk really fast, so I told Becky I knew this wouldn't go an hour and a half. But when I'm doing a session, I usually use this, and I say, okay, one of you in the group is going to get to come up on stage with me and sing karaoke, right? And there's a piece of paper underneath one of your chairs. And when you do this and you watch the audience, it is hilarious. Some people dive under their chairs because they're like, heck yeah, I'll be that one. I'll be that person that comes up and sings with you, Gert, right? And then some people just sit there and they don't move because they think if it's not them, you know, if they don't look, it can't be them, right? But it's all around the creativity behavior of bravery, right? And I talk about this because when you're about to do something innovative or creative, right, you have to have some bravery. You have to have, you know, some kind of you know, being courageous a bit, you know, because you're leaping. You know, 10 months ago when I started my own business and left Valencia College, I was like, oh my God, what if this isn't successful, you know? But one of my friends bought me a little tray, and it says, leap and the net will appear. And I'm like, you know what? I talk about this every day. I have to be brave. So, you know, if I fall flat on my face, I'm not afraid to work. You know, I'll flip burgers. I'll do whatever, right? I'm a good sorority girl. I can do it. So, you know, bravery and creativity and innovation go hand in hand. So I want to talk about just some top tips for bravery, and then we'll do some Q&A. So the first one is to channel somebody that you know is brave, somebody in your life, right? Could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be even like, you know, a celebrity, someone you admire, right? For me, it was a little girl named Marley, and she was 8 when she passed away. She had brain cancer. But Marley was afraid of nothing, and so she completely lived every day to the fullest. And so when I get nervous about something, I'm always like, okay, what would Marley do? So find somebody in your life that you can channel their courage, right? Another one is visualize success. So when you guys finish a project, or you get to the end of the semester, or you know you've accomplished something big at sorority or fraternity headquarters, you know you're done with the project, right? What does that look like when you cross the finish line? You know, so I tell the story about Muhammad Ali. Before every boxing match, he would visualize what it looked like at the end of the boxing match. when he was the winner. You know, his arms are in the air, his fists are in the air, and he's won the match. The first time he lost was to Joe Frazier, and the media said, well, what happened? You didn't visualize success? And he goes, oh, I did. Joe just visualized it better. But what does that look like when you guys cross the finish line? So visualize what it looks like. Another top tip is to share the scare. So, you know, I mean, grab a colleague. It could be somebody from your own sorority or fraternity. It could be somebody from the university. It could be, you know, anything. But grab someone else and say, hey, I want to go out on a limb and try this. Be my safety net, right? And just, you know, hold their hand. Right? So it's really important, you know, that you just try things, right? We're all going to drop the ball sometimes. That's okay. Apply the learning back. Any one of you that has a Dyson vacuum in your home, that Dyson vacuum, Sir Richard and his team recreated that vacuum 5,127 times. They kept realizing that something wasn't quite right, but then they would learn from it, and they would apply that learning back, right, until they created this fabulous piece of machinery that cleans your house. So really important that you actually, you know, keep trying, right, and share the scare. And then the last thing I'll tell you is, oh my gosh, just act as if, right? Get your swag on. People don't need to know that you're about to throw up. You know, you just have that self-confidence oozing from you. After a while, you kind of start to believe it, you know? So being brave is really important. I want to leave you with this quote about bravery. And it is the opposite of bravery is not cowardice. It's conformity. And you guys, in our world, in our Greek world, we've got to not conform. You know, we've got to stay ahead of the pack. We are the leaders. So it's really important. So that's what I had prepared for you all today. I don't know if you guys have some questions that you want to send to Becky, but I'm happy to sit here and have a conversation with you. So I'm watching my screen to see if anything's coming up. So Becky?
Yeah, thanks, Gert. Yeah, feel free to send questions in the questions area, and Gert will get them answered for you. So this could be on, you know, how to apply these different strategies, or a specific question that you might have from your institution or your organization. So yeah, feel free to send those.
Come on, some brave soul out there. There we go. Well, here's what I'll tell you guys. Even if, you know, after a while, if you marinate on something or you want to try something, just go to my website, which is listed on this slide, and it's broadperspective.net, and you can get a hold of me through there. I'm happy to, you know, answer any questions or whatever. Okay, so I have a question. How can you get a team motivated to first brainstorm? The big thing, like I talked about, come up with a challenge that you can actually work on, right? So you don't want to make the challenge so big that you're actually solving for world peace, because people will get frustrated. Also, you don't want to put too many details in a challenge, because after a while that becomes just really an executionable brief and you should just go do it, right? So you want to come up with a challenge that they can actually solve for and have some success around. So it could be anything in your chapters, from like, you know, how might we, you know, bring in more members this year? How might we make quota? How might we change up, you know, how we do, I was going to say rush. You can tell I'm old. I'm older than you guys. But how might we do recruitment differently? You know, what does that look like? But give them something that they can actually ideate around, and then that will help a lot. Hang on. Someone's calling me. Sorry, you guys. Let's say you are considering changing a few processes or programs. Print is really little, you guys, and like I said, I'm old, so hang on. All right. Would you create an endowment of these strategies for a team meeting? You know what I find is having people come up with their own stuff. So I just worked with a school district here, K-12 school district, but it was for the non-instructional team, and they wanted to come up with a leadership program, a leadership academy, because what was happening was they were promoting people, and they weren't, gearing them up with leadership skills. They were just kind of throwing them in the deep end. And so what I did for the last 6 months, we just finished it. It was actually one of my sorority sisters actually hired me for this project. And what we did was I brought in a group of these people, and we worked together for 6 months, and they came up with their own leadership academy. I just facilitated it. So that's how you get buy-in from a team and from, for a meeting, is get them to talk about it, get them to tell you their needs. Again, it speaks to those insights and those clues that we talked about briefly, but, it's really important to do that. Another question is, do you have any daily routine that you feel keep you on track? Yes. I walk my dog. So when I tell you guys go for a walk, I'm not kidding. So I go and I take him down by the lake, and, we just feel the breeze blowing, and I'm just, I have my little, like kind of Zen moment, but it helps me think. And then I kind of organize my day. Another thing I do is, because I get my best ideas in the shower, you guys will think this is nutty. My cleaning lady hates me. But they make markers and sticky notes for the shower now. So sometimes I'll just go and take a really long shower and write on the walls in my shower, right? Because I'm old, and by the time I towel off, I forget my ideas. But, sometimes I just do my own brainstorm, just, while I'm taking a shower. So it's, find what works for you. But again, just put in that 10 or 15 minutes every day where you can kind of get organized and get yourself motivated, because that's how you motivate others. Ask yourself, too, what lately has inspired you the most? So really important, too, to figure out what's inspiring you, right? And then replicate that a bit. A lot of times for me, I like speaking to, college students, because they've got all that yummy energy that they don't know what to do with. And that helps me a bit, too. So for the question above, resistance, especially from alumni volunteers. Yeah, we've all got those, right? And it does happen. But I think, too, just finding out what inspires them, right? So I just spoke at my Founders Day for Delta Gamma here in the Central Florida area, and it was some 50-year members, some recent members, that kind of stuff, recent grads, and it was really interesting because I just picked a topic that I thought would go across the way, and I got them all involved, and I made it be interactive. So they had to get up and they had to interact with each other, and they had to shake it up, so they couldn't clump. So all the 50-year members couldn't sit together. They had to actually inspire each other with their stories. So I think sometimes mixing them up a bit, too, I don't know, really helps. So the next question is, what's your advice for getting, your team to examine what needs innovating? Oh, that's an interesting question. So I would say sometimes, your teams take on a lot, right? And sometimes some of those things can go away. So if you could prioritize a bit. So, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the tool SWOT. I don't use SWOT because that was like my mama's tool, right? So I use one called PPCO. So we list all the positives about what your team's doing, right? That's the first P. What are the positives? The second P are, what are the potentials? What are some things that we're not doing but we could be doing, right? And then the C stands for, what are some challenges or some concerns, right? And then the O is for opportunities or overcomes. And it's like, how do we fix the concerns or the challenges? What can we do, right? And so that kind of helps you prioritize a bit and look at things. And there's some things that can go away so that you can bring in freshness and you can bring in some fresh new thoughts. So just some thoughts. How do you encourage your students to attempt bravery when their community is ingrained in conformity? Yeah, I mean, and I work with a lot of groups and a lot of businesses that are like this too. But it's kind of just finding a way for them to be encouraged to share their ideas. So whether that's just an idea box in your sorority or fraternity house, if it's a way for people just to voice their thoughts. because what I find is a lot of the best ideas are not coming from headquarters, and they're not coming from the advisors. They're coming from the actual students, you know, but giving them a way to actually run things up the flagpole. And, you know, so maybe you have like an open forum. Let's do an idea exchange, you know, that kind of thing. So maybe you just throw that into a meeting. You know, what are some ideas that you guys have? Give them 5 minutes. I mean, it doesn't have to be like an overwhelming thing, but just a way that they know that they can express some thoughts. Okay, what types of conditions or stimulus in a group environment stifle creativity and innovation? Oh, this is easy. Okay, so the types of stuff that stifle are people saying no, people not being open to ideas, and people, you know, and also you guys not having good stimulus around, right? So, you know, if we're, okay, so for example, that session I just did for Longhorn Steaks, you know, we're going to just talk about steak, because what we were doing was their TV ads for 2018, right? So I was like, well, we need lots of like inspiration around the room. So what we did was I printed out all these pictures of steak and the toppings and all the ways that you can make steak, and then we came up with a vocabulary as well. So like we took all these yummy words like smoldering and, you know, fire grilled and whatever, and I blew them all up and we taped them to the wall so that people were surrounded by stimulus. So, you know, and I mean, I know that's steak, so that's pretty basic stuff, but just having stimulus. A lot of times, you guys, I just put out like Play-Doh and pipe cleaners, like colorful pipe cleaners. You know, just let people touch things, and or fidget toys. You know, just stuff that, you know, you don't normally find in a meeting setting. Just anything that will inspire people to think differently. So, any recommendations for groups who cannot meet in person and have to use yeah, voice conferencing and email? That happened to us a lot at Disney because, you know, we went between us and California. Yeah, I mean, make people be on time, make people be polite, okay, and not talk over each other. Like if you guys can do like a Google Docs thing where you can share some best practices, like that pharmaceutical group I worked with last week, they're spread out all over the country as well, and so they were trying to find some ways that they could remain connected. Even if you can do some Skype calls, you know, so at least you see people, you know. I do a lot of Skype calls, and then I'm in my pajamas from the waist down, and they have no idea. So, but, you know, if you can see people's facial expressions and stuff, that's always really helpful. You know, but try not to just talk over each other and, you know, just keep your thing on mute so that you don't get to speak. You know, and maybe like at some of my creativity conferences, we use a thing called a talking stick. So maybe you could have a virtual talking stick. So now it's Becky's turn, you know, and then Becky passes it to Andrea, and then when Andrea's done, she passes it to Chris or whomever. But everybody gets a chance to speak. So that's kind of a way to do some things too. Next question is, what are some tips and techniques on how to bring a group back when they move away from the ground rules you set at the beginning of the discussion, not staying positive, struggle to move on from the past, both with students and with professional staff? We are guilty of the same thing. So, okay, so that goes back to signaling, right? So a couple things I didn't talk about with signaling. So there's, you know, the beer company Molson Coors. What they do is because they all are soccer lovers, right? So they use soccer cards in their meetings. And so if someone's being that Debbie Downer, or they're not playing by the agreement, they can throw a yellow card at them, and then everybody knows what that means, right? A thing we used at Disney, because we like to use all the characters and stuff, but we'd have an Elmo doll, and if somebody was just, you know, poo-pooing ideas and just going on, we would throw the Elmo doll at them across the table, and it stood for enough, let's move on, right? A story I tell, and even Becky hasn't heard me tell this story, but I'm going to tell you guys this really quickly, but it's a good story to tell. You can revise it for whomever your audience is, but often I tell people, okay, so at the end of our creative session today, we're all going to fly to Hollywood, and I've secured a mansion, and we're going to go to a pool party there in the Hollywood Hills, right? And, you know, when we get on the plane, we can be spray tanned if we want to be spray tanned. We're going to get new outfits. So we land, we get to the mansion, we're having this fabulous party. The breeze is blowing, the sun is shining, and we're rubbing elbows with the celebrities. And I decided it's time for us to go take a swim. So I take everybody over to the pool, And oh my gosh, I look down in the pool, and there are 3 pieces of poo in the pool, okay? They're not baby Ruths, they're poo. Are any of you going in? And of course, no one ever says they want to go in the pool at that point, right? So then I say, oh my gosh, so I get the net, and I get 2 pieces of the poo out. Are anyone going in? There's only 1 piece of poo left. And, people are like, oh, gross, no, So I'm like, right. And that the moral of the story is it only takes 1 piece of poo in the pool to ruin a perfectly good Hollywood Hills pool party. Whereas in a meeting, it takes 1 person being the poo-poo, right? So that can bring down the entire meeting, right? And so then I go, so don't be the poo in the pool. And then if somebody starts acting like that, and we did this a lot at Disney, we'd say this. And so if somebody started being that person, we'd be like, are you being the poo? And they're like, oh, I don't want to be the poo. Well, then don't be the poo. Stick by the rules. So, I mean, it's a little graphic, but it works. So, if you're trying to be kind of funny or whatever, but really nobody ever wants to be the poo in the pool. So, okay, so Becky brings up a good question here. So students automatically assume that the answer will be no before they even ask the question. How do you encourage them to overcome this? So we use something called invitational stems. So it's the way you ask the question, right? So so I would teach students this, so ask a question, how might we? Or in what ways might we? Or how do we? That kind of thing. Ask a question in that manner so that you don't automatically invite the no. You invite some thought-provoking answers, right? So, just, or wouldn't it be great if we did this, and I used to work for the mayor of the city of Orlando, and he never said no to me because I always asked for things with such, oh my gosh, such encouragement and so much enthusiasm that he hated to say no to me, so he never did. He would say, well, Gert, here's what we can do, right? So just don't invite the no, and teach them to do that, because after they graduate, when moving out into the business world, if they continue to use that kind of language, people aren't going to say no to them as much. So it's really important to kind of use the right language too that invites creativity and innovation. Okay, any other questions, you guys?
Good. I think that really rounds out all the questions that we've gotten so far. So, yeah, it looks like we're kind of approaching the end of our time.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much for your questions and for your attention. So I wish you the best. But feel free to go on my website. There's other tips and tools there, and steal away.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank Gert again for your presentation. I know I learned a lot. I know even though, we've seen some of these and heard some of these stories, it's always great to get a good reminder, and I just feel inspired to think differently. So, yeah, and thank you everyone who attended for your participation and great questions today. We hope you learned some new ideas and practices that will improve your work. And following today's session, we'll have a recording posted on the AFA website within a few weeks, and all webinar participants will receive an evaluation from today's session, and we hope that you will take the time to provide us with your feedback. So, like we said during the session, May's Advanced U program is focused on research, and it'll be with Josh Schutz from Dyad Strategies, and look for the sign-up email for this program occurring on May 16th. So, thank you again to Gert, and for all of you as participants, we hope you continue to think differently and work differently, and join us again for Advanced U. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.